So, without any more wittering from me, through the guests briefly, from left to right, or my left to right, Nigel Milton from Heathrow Airport. You've probably heard of it. It's in the south somewhere. Then Nadhim, a member of some political party or other, I forget which one. Julie from D-Drill, who actually does something in the real world, in the real economy. It involves drilling and sawing and cutting and all those in concrete. It's very remarkable. And then Steve Hughes from Policy Exchange, the head of economic and social policy at Policy Exchange, who can tell us, essentially, what the facts are, who's right and who's wrong. So you know, I think broadly what we're here to discuss. We're here to talk about infrastructure and, to use a slightly charged term, NIMBYism. I should declare an interest. I work at the Daily Telegraph, a newspaper which has contributed significantly to the improvement of the planning process in recent years, or, depending on your perspective, stopped a lot of very important housing and other developments going ahead because our readers didn't like them. So I have a certain insight into some of the forces at work here. But that is quite enough from me. I will now ask each of our panelists to speak for a small number of minutes about what they make of the issue, and then we'll go over to you for some questions. So, Nigel, do you want to go first?
Thank you, James. Yes. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for coming along to this afternoon's Fringe. So I'm going to talk about, I think as we all know, about how infrastructure and NIMBYism, infrastructure investment and NIMBYism, how those two things can coexist. There's three main points I want to make. First is that infrastructure investment is vital if the UK is going to win the global race. The second point is that NIMBYs are not always the majority. Most people do want growth and jobs in their neighbourhood, but promoters of infrastructure need to engage with the whole local community, not just with the loudest voices. And then third point is that in the end, the politicians need to grasp the nettle. They need to make decisions that are in the interests of the country. So the first point, that infrastructure investment is vital to the UK. I think it's now well understood and agreed that the quality of infrastructure is a major consideration when companies are looking to invest in a country, and that this national interest needs to be properly understood. Talking about Heathrow, economic analysis shows that Heathrow expansion would bring tens of billions of pounds of benefits to Britain, as would expansion at Gatwick bring lots of economic benefits to the country. And those aren't just benefits to one geographical area, they're the positive impact of Heathrow or of Gatwick expansion would be felt throughout the whole country. At Heathrow, we've visited over 20 chambers of commerce in the last 18 months, consulting them on our plans and engaging them in the Davis Commission process, the airport's commission process. And from the top of the country in Inverness to the bottom of the country in Newquay, from the west in Wales to the east in Norfolk, we've covered the length and the breadth of the country, and businesses have told us their views on our plans, and we've amended our plans to reflect that. So the positive impacts of airport expansion are going to be widespread throughout the country. But the negative impacts of Heathrow expansion, and indeed of Gatwick expansion, will be felt most acutely by those who live near the airport. So how do you actually then deal with the people who are living around the airport? And I think that the first point I want to make is that NIMBYs aren't in the majority as far as Heathrow is concerned. Most people living around Heathrow do want growth and jobs in their neighbourhood, and that we need to, as promoters, to engage with the whole local community and not just the loudest voices. I think that the debate around Heathrow has been characterised as West London is against Heathrow and the rest of the country is in favour of it. But actually last week we released our latest wave of polling which Populous carried out, and there's a card on your seat showing those results. And Populous polled over 9,500 local residents across 10 constituencies around Heathrow. The results were weighted to make them representative, and overall 49% of local people support Heathrow expansion and 33% oppose it. In 9 out of 10 of those constituencies, more people support expansion than oppose it, Richmond being the exception. And another result I think worth highlighting from that polling is that while 25% of residents say they would be more likely to vote for an MP that's pro-Heathrow, 17% said they'd more likely to vote for an anti-expansion MP. But that means that 58% actually said that Heathrow expansion wasn't something that would necessarily impact on their vote. And yet, if you look at many of the MPs around Heathrow, many of them try and position themselves locally with their view about Heathrow, as though that is the only local issue. And most of them that do that are those that oppose Heathrow expansion, even though the polling tells us that the majority of of their constituents might actually support Heathrow, but people have other concerns. Now, I lead our Heathrow's engagement with the local communities and know more than most people how strongly there are views against Heathrow. But what's clear is those people don't hold the majority view. Heathrow's opponents are articulate and they have legitimate concerns, and Heathrow should and must be held to account by local MPs. But MPs need to represent all of their constituents. And while it's difficult when there's a split in views, they do need to recognise that there is that split and that some people are quite happy to see the airport grow. So the simple characterisation of the debate does not reflect the complex reality. Both HAC and Clear Skies, who are the lobby group most opposing Heathrow expansion, and Back Heathrow, the group that are pro-expansion, they both claim to represent residents living around Heathrow, and they both do. And as our polling shows, local people oppose Heathrow expansion and local people support Heathrow expansion. So what does that mean? It means in the end, politicians need to grasp the nettle and they need to make decisions that are in the national interest. Yes, Heathrow needs to engage with our local opponents. Yes, we need to address their concerns where we can. And yes, we need to mitigate and compensate where we can't. But overall, once all the accurate information is gleaned on the local and national views of a project, we need the government to be prepared to square that circle. So Howard Davis and his fellow commissioners will recommend to the next government whether a new third runway at Heathrow should go ahead. It's then for the Secretary of State for Transport next year to decide whether or not to give that the go-ahead. Of course, these big infrastructure decisions, whether they affect transport, energy or housing, need to be made on the basis of evidence. But above all, they need to be made. And perhaps this is the one area where, whether you live next door to the airport fence or live in Inverness and want to export your products to China, that the views of everyone is consistent. That is, that a decision on Heathrow needs to be made, and this time it needs to stick.
Thank you. Nadhim.
Thanks, James. And as someone whose London home is in Putney, I've been bombarded by Heathrow Airport, pamphlets going through the door with lots of surveys. So you're clearly getting the message that you need a sort of grassroots support for this as well as the stuff you do at Party Conference, Nigel. I don't think there is any argument that the successful delivery of infrastructure is vital. You've heard the Chancellor's theme, the Golden Boys, and looking to the future and not the past. In the UK, we have some of the greatest advantages in any economy. If I just sort of stand back and think of my own time in business and when I built up, you've got a flexible labour market, much more flexible than the rest of Europe, the English language, world-class universities, and of course, the City of London. Yet, they're all, I think, being undermined by decades of short-term decision-making on infrastructure. Patrick McLaughlin, I think, said today that we've dropped from 7th in the world in infrastructure investment down to 33rd. That is a terrible indictment on any government. As a result, business is trapped with a Victorian-era transport network and communications network that are decades out of date. The state of our infrastructure is not a theoretical policy debate. It is about the bottom line for UK business. And I'm sure we're going to hear from the business on this panel about what it means to their profitability, reach and international competitiveness. And I promise not to mention the C word in this debate today. James.
To explain that, Lloyd, it's not as rude as it sounds. What I said earlier on is I was going to penalise anybody who mentioned China in this kind of or at least mention China without addressing the fact that China doesn't have to do all the following things like due process and the rule of law. Because we probably all sat through conversations where someone says, "Gosh, China is building a dozen high-speed railways every week, and we're not doing anything." Well, yeah, that's entirely true. But on the other hand, China shoots people, so that's
Order.
That's the C word explained.
But there we go. Getting back to the point, infrastructure doesn't just help business; it also supports efficient and effective delivery of what we do, public services. And here's the paradox, ladies and gentlemen: if you were to ask the public if we needed infrastructure improvement, there'd be an overwhelming amount of support for that question. But ask them if they want them in their backyard, and then of course the answer becomes less certain. This shouldn't surprise us. I spent 10 years of my life looking and understanding human behaviour. It is a natural human instinct Think about yourselves. If someone suggests a new road went through the field in front or behind your lovely home, what would your response be? Now the question is, how do we deal with this? Well, firstly, I think we have to recognise that so-called NIMBYism is there and it's not going to go away. People are always going to be opposed to something happening in their back garden. So if we recognise that, what happens to the debate about how we deliver infrastructure? I think it means we have to be much more transparent. And one of the great things from what we just heard from the Chancellor is sometimes you just got to make the really hard choices. It is a trade-off, and you've got to be out there. When I say we, politicians, opinion leaders, opinion formers, and be transparent about what we're trying to do and explain those tough decisions. The second is that we have to come up with a proper mechanism for compensating local residents for the impact infrastructure has on them. What I mean by mechanism is not just the value, but the speed at which they get compensated, because it is something that can blight your life. I've had that in my own constituency, where, whether it's on housing projects or otherwise. I also think, unfortunately, the approach of many housing developers has been wrong on Section 106 and has led to real cynicism from the public about funds going to the community. When I go to local meetings and talk about, well, there's this additional funding, people just roll their eyes at that, and that's really a challenge to the construction industry. There's a lot to be learned from the way other countries handle these things. For example, in France, people around a new nuclear power station will get free electricity. Now, whilst this doesn't overcome all of the objections, it at least makes people feel that they are being compensated and connect the compensation to the benefit that infrastructure is providing to the rest of the country. So if we take the idea and apply it to a controversial infrastructure project, high speed, say, should someone whose home is considered blighted by high speed not just get cash compensation, but free rail travel as well? Or take fracking, should homes impacted by a fracking site get reduced prices or even free gas? Of course, the mechanisms for this wouldn't be simple, and I don't claim that they are, because obviously the constructors of high speed have nothing to do with the rest of the rail network, and that fracking site may not sell to your gas provider. But perhaps we shouldn't let something like that stop us from thinking outside of the box today. There's lots of other areas that I'm sure we'll cover this afternoon, including the role of judicial review. We've seen judicial review, or the threat of judicial review, hold up many infrastructure projects, often, by the way, on consultation technicalities, making lawyers very, very rich because they go back and say, well, you didn't consult properly, run the consultation again. The outcomes are the same, but the delays are incredibly costly. Is that right? Big question. Thank you, James.
Thank you. Now, Julie, why don't you just kindly taking time off building things to come talk to us?
Hello there, my name's Julie White. I run a concrete drilling and soaring and controlled demolition company called D-Drill. I have 8 branches across England, so as far as Newcastle and as far as and as south as Plymouth. I did follow the work during the recession into London, so I did start a branch right in the centre of the recession, and I did a buyout of this company in 2008. And within 5 months of owning it, I lost 40% of my turnover. It was like the tap had been turned off. 20% first of all from house building, then 20% from hard construction. So we can do anything from drilling a small hole from plumber's pipe to actually a escalator pit for Primark, to cutting a motorway bridge down, to cutting a power station in half. So everybody on the construction site needs a hole. So I didn't say the C word. So it's been a roller coaster ride for me and for my company. And when I took the company over, I had a very aging workforce of around about 52. So I decided that I thought I was only going to be in a recession for 3 years and not still be in recession now. And so I decided to train more apprentices. So I pushed apprentices through, 20 to 30 a year. And now 45% of all my workforce have been trained as apprentices or gone through an apprenticeship course, and my average age of my workforce is down to 28. So I've got a fantastic you know, and I retrained all the older diamond drillers and pushed productivity up. I am employee. I am doing this every day. So to be honest, I have no idea why I'm sitting on this. You know,
We're very glad you were.
the likes of Heathrow and things like that. But if you think, I love my industry. I love, you know, I'm really at the dirty end. And you think every pound that's spent in construction gives £2.84 back to the wider economy. So that's anything from PR people to marketing to builders, merchants to labour people. You think we can, if we employ 1,000 people, more people, we can then give 3,000 to the greater people around us. So we are an industry, that is it's huge. We can actually employ very quickly. If every SME, small to medium enterprise in the construction industry actually took an apprentice on, you'd make a big hole in that employment. The problem is, we're finding it hard. There's so much red tape to run our companies. There is so much trying to get money for apprentices. To be honest, for the first 2 or 3 years, I didn't take any money for my apprentices because it was too hard to do the paperwork. And then you've got the big boys, the big people that have people employed fully to get grants, and they were taking the money. So really, give it back to us employees, because there is good employees out there, and give us, you know, get the money to be able to put it in the right direction. For me, if you think about it, we've lost approximately 200,000 people out of our industry since the recession started in 2008. So you think about it, that's more people that's actually employed in the motor industry in this country. For what they're giving us, they're telling us that infrastructure is going to go off. They talk about HS2, they talk about Heathrow, but for God's sake, just get on with it now. We just need something to happen either way, because we have been holding on, and I know that this winter is just going to be as tough. But you think about it, we've got a huge problem with our skills gap. I mean, I have been one of the only companies in my industry training apprentices, and now my labour is like gold dust to my industry. And the problem is the labour rates are going up higher than I can keep control of. So you imagine it, I'm doing work now that I quoted from a year to 6 months ago, and the labour rates are going up quicker, and people that haven't trained through this recession are after my work people. So if you think about it, what the government say, I mean, I'm not an economist, I'm just running my business and employing 250 hairy-arse diamond drillers and sawers and office women and everybody. So you think about it, to get the growth that we need 40 to 50,000 tradesmen, you know, really qualified tradesmen to actually get the growth that the government want for us now. Where are we going to get it from? What's going to happen? The other problem is, as I said, get on with infrastructure. Either say yes or no to it, but let us get on with it. And the problem starts right from planning. If you think about it, I mean, I'm not living in the Westminster bubble. I'm living across the United Kingdom. And you've got Coventry. I'm from Coventry, and there's a nice construction site going off down there that's been rocking and rolling for 2 years now. Been at shovel stage, and it could bring on at least 14,000 jobs. But it's stopped now. The council have said yes, the local people said yes, and now it's stuck with old Mr. Pickles. For God's sake, let's get going, because we can employ, we can train, and we can bring people on. Our industry is an amazing industry.
Thank you. You said you weren't an economist. Fortunately, we have an economist in
Oh, sorry.
They're people too. Steve Hughes from Policy Exchange.
Thanks. Good afternoon, everybody. I think everything pretty much that I was going to say has been said already, but I'll say a little bit about infrastructure and the fact that it isn't an optional process. It's absolutely vital for the future success of the UK economy. And the public policy questions around infrastructure are more about where we build it, how we build it, and who pays for it as well. In the terms of where, we have a situation whereby we're trying to increase productivity and economic growth in other parts of the country outside the greater southeast. Infrastructure is a key part of that, but equally there's only a certain pot of money available from publicly backed infrastructure projects to go around. Where do you see the economic benefits for infrastructure, say, in the north versus infrastructure in developing London, which is essentially a huge driver of the UK's economic growth? The types of infrastructure as well, we have problems all over the pitch, to use a sporting analogy, in terms of infrastructure. Do you spend it on transport? Do you spend it on digital? Do you spend it on energy? Where do you spend these limited funds on developing the UK's infrastructure problems? The economic arguments are pretty straightforward. Everybody understands them. Infrastructure, whether it's housing, energy, transport, whatever, is an input into a business activity. And business activity is supported by infrastructure. If the quality of our infrastructure is poor or poorer than a competitor nations, then that puts our companies at a competitive disadvantage. As Nadhim said before, we've got a lot going for us in terms of the UK economy. We're an advanced economy, we're highly skilled, etc., etc., etc. What is notable is the fact that infrastructure ranks so poorly down the list in what is the UK's assets. And to give you a couple of statistics, between 2000 and 2009, the UK built 46 miles of additional motorway. In the same period, France built 850 miles of additional motorway. Germany built 680 miles of additional motorway in the same period. These aren't the Chinas of the world, they don't shoot people. They are the people who are our direct competitors on continental Europe. Now, of course, there's geographic differences in size between the UK, Germany and France. Obviously there is, but that doesn't account for the differences in infrastructure. As a result, Germany and France have got a lower traffic density, which allows them to move freight and people around the country much more easily than we can do. The second thing, which is essentially more local, is the building of homes. Policy Exchange has estimated that we need to build 300,000 homes a year, not just to cope with additional demand in housing, but to cope with the shortfall in housing that we have at the moment. And we're currently building just over 100,000 homes. The problem's only going to get worse. So we've got a problem, we know what it is, we know the economic benefits of infrastructure, and we know it's not getting built. So what is the problem? And aside from NIMBYism, which is the topic of today, obviously there are other problems as well. Big infrastructure projects have huge upfront costs, and the returns from those infrastructure projects will only be realised many years, if not decades down the line. That creates a problem because there can be changes in the way people interact with infrastructure or changes in technology which may mean the return on that infrastructure doesn't come about. Take, for example, Eurotunnel as Channel Tunnel, which overstated its passenger numbers when it was originally doing the project proposal. The other thing is that governments dither. We've talked about this. White papers, green papers, reviews seem to happen for years and years and years before anything actually happens. And that can change when there's a change in government as well, and it can be kicked around like this. Then we come to NIMBYism. So NIMBYism, first thing to say is there are actually natural tipping points that occur within arguments around infrastructure development. So in 2010, the British Social Attitude Survey stated that respondents stated that just under 50% of people opposed new housing developments within their area. 3 years later, that proportion had fallen to just under a third. So there's been a shift in public opinion. Why was this the case? Well, I think it's because there's some kind of intergenerational awareness and fairness issue with that particular type of infrastructure. Older people can see younger people not getting on the housing ladder or staying at home to try and save for a deposit, and so they soften their attitudes to infrastructure. Now the problem is with NIMBYism, it's not always the case that attitudes will soften. If I was a farmer with my farm being in the family for generations and a high-speed rail line was going to cut up my farm through the middle, I don't think I'd ever reach a tipping point in the argument. And I'm one of those people who'd never be convinced by the projects of big infrastructure. So how do we, other than natural tipping points, engage with people and make sure that they're on board with infrastructure projects? Well, if you speak to the utilities companies or speak to developers, the message is actually pretty clear, and Nigel touched on this as well, is you engage early and you engage well with politicians and the local communities and tell them what's in it for them and what stake they're going to get in it and what benefits they're going to get from it as well. And this aspect of it is so important that whole industries have been developed around this attempt to engage with communities. I'm sure some people here work in that industry as well. And the other aspect is obviously, as Nadhim said, is compensation. Make sure we compensate people well, and they're much more likely to support infrastructure projects than otherwise. And the final thing I'd say is just to echo what Julie said, is that NIMBYism and infrastructure can obviously coexist. It's been doing so for centuries, probably, but it becomes ever more crucial in the world in which we live today because of globalisation. If other people are doing it faster than us and better than us, it chips away at our business's competitiveness. So it's about getting NIMBYism and infrastructure coexisting, but making sure it happens on a good timescale.
Thank you. I'm going to use my chair's prerogative to ask one very brief question of everybody, because I think there's one theme that counts in almost all four of those openings there. Question for everybody, really. Talk about the need to compensate people for the consequences of infrastructure. I'm just wondering, is there a case for going beyond compensation? Compensation essentially says, I will address the damage I'm doing to you. Do those who want to win consent for infrastructure have to go a lot further than that and say, look, yes, I will address the damage, I'll make it good, but then I will give you something beyond that as well. Nadhim, you mentioned rail tickets. I'll hold my hand up. In the media, this is often written up as developers trying to bribe communities. I have to admit, I've always slightly struggled to see why we write it that way. Is if there's something dishonourable or wrong in that, I don't see it that way. But yeah, I don't know. I'll let you all talk now. Should you if Nigel and others who want to get permission for their projects, should they be giving more things to the people who are directly and indirectly affected?
Yes. Is a simple answer.
Great. What are you giving them?
So what we're proposing in terms of
how much?
We get free flowers.
what we're
He listen properly. Listen properly. What are you going to give him?
What we've announced so far is that for the properties that we need to take, we will give the unblighted value of the house index linked to the pre-blight, so percentage of the value of the house, plus what was called a 25% home loss payment. So 25% of the value of the home we will give to people as compensation for the loss of their home. Now that's HS2 is 10%, so that giving a call at 25% goes beyond where the legal or the standard kind of level. So that's a starting off point, and I think that certainly the reaction we've had to that offer is that starts to show that we are taking this issue more seriously than we have done in the past, where I think the perception has been that in the past the industry had tried to get away with the lowest possible cost. So I think that certainly our shareholders are aware that if they want to expand Heathrow, they are not going to be able to do it on the cheap. It is there are legitimate concerns we need to do. So that's but I think that we are having serious discussions with the local authorities around the airport as to what schemes and projects and things are there going on around in those communities that would be most impacted, whereby we can help. And again, I don't like that use of the word. Obviously the use of the word bribe stuff, but it's about how can we help make the quality of life in the communities around the airport better. So how can we help provide better facilities, better community cohesion, better schooling, more opportunities for the people living around the airport to benefit from the positive. So I think that as Heathrow we have to accept there will be negatives for the people living around the airport. So how can we make sure that as much as possible of the positives of Heathrow expansion are directed towards those people who are going to be adversely affected? And that is and I think that and then he referred to it. I think the energy industry has started that kind of precedent there of having that of that. Yes, there are national benefits, but if there are local impacts, then local people need to really see the benefits in their pocket, in the lives, in the quality of life that they are living around the airport. So yes, we do need to do more.
Nadhim, you raised the possibility of discounted rail tickets for people near HS2. Any other examples of free goodies that people in this room should be giving away to people affected by their labours?
Well, I think it's worth having the discussion, and I think all I would add to what I've already said is part of that sort of grassroots campaign. Of course, there are those who are sort of directly blighted, and then you sort of you go out of that diameter further out and understand what whether it's through the local authorities or directly with communities, what are the drivers? It feels to me as a member of parliament that sometimes there's a disconnect the local community, is quite cynical about Section 106s. They sort of, well, that's fine for the district council or the county, but none of it's going to flow back to me.
So
they don't mean
are you
necessarily directly. This isn't about just bribes
but
or greed.
The energy industry, some parts of the renewable energy industry does directly give discounts to local consumers, whereas the development industry, as we say, Section 106, that tends to go to local authorities. Do you think there's a case for someone who wants to build a house or building a housing estate actually saying how can we more directly compensate or incentivise local people to give their consent rather than going to the council?
Local communities. I think it needs to get closer to.
What is a community?
Well,
a
parish. So in my definition, my sort of a village, a parish council, they don't quite feel that if they're about to get 800,000 homes being built, are they really going to see any improvement that is directly linked to the sort of the price they're having to pay for this? And I haven't got the answers here, and I'm not going to sit here and make them up on the hoof, because you'll probably write them up as something that I've just made up. But the point being is I think in many ways my experience of this is if we can be creative, then there could be good ways of getting that sort of grassroots campaign going, which obviously influences politicians.
You obviously believe strongly in the benefits to your company and the wider economy of this sort of project. How do, but the people at the other end of the planning process who are holding this up for you, what could be done for them to persuade them, do you think?
I mean, it's like everything, I'm running a company, and some of the decisions I make, I can't, some of my employees think they're wrong. You can't actually please everyone all of the time. The thing is that, yes, let's look at it, let's look at the value of the houses, let's look at the value of the land that these actual infrastructures going through, and make sure that the benefits outweigh the positive, the negatives. So, to me, I haven't got the answers as to that. And I feel very strongly for people that, like HS2 is going through their back garden and they can't move, they're in this again, but they also, like me as a company that's trying to employ, they're in this holding pattern. So again, we just need a decision. We need speed.
And briefly, Steve, on this, the point of the conversation, what we briefly touched on the energy industry and against transport. Very briefly, what are the best examples of of compensation, community benefit in infrastructure, do you think?
So, I mean, look, the first thing to say is that obviously each infrastructure project is different, and if you have a massive infrastructure project like HS2, obviously you're cutting through a load of different communities, and they're all going to have different negotiations on what they want out of it and how they can be compensated. Examples, there was, I can never remember the name of the place, but there was a wind farm that was in Scotland that opened up significantly a piece of moorland that was going to be used by hikers, walkers, everything else that wouldn't otherwise have been accessible, and that was kind of the key point for that piece of infrastructure. That's very specific to a specific piece of infrastructure.
Not always straightforward. Here's some cash.
Yeah, absolutely not. Yeah, it's a combination of monetary compensation and understanding and what else can the community benefit from.
Thank you. And no, as promised, questions. Gentleman there was first presenter.
Hello, Matt Smith from Renewable UK. So we've talked about energy infrastructure. Renewable industry is, as the panel's already highlighted, doing a lot. There are developers who look at money off energy bills. There are developers who are engaged on shared ownership, so offering community stakes, offering revenue, either equity or debt stakes in projects, which helps people feel they get something back. But as Steve says, it's often other things. So the important thing is you start with a discussion about the community, and that's what they want. So there are apprenticeship schemes being funded by generation projects, etc. My question is about the Conservative Party, and particularly in energy generation. We've talked about NIMBYs. Yes, there will always be NIMBYs because there's always people care about their locality, and there's always a debate about what should happen. if you look at polling for renewable projects, you find there's a very stark difference between Tory activists and the wider constituency base, and that includes Conservative voters who tend to support renewable projects, including onshore wind, but you have a small minority very opposed. The Conservative Party is split on that issue. How does it get past that?
Just ask the practicing member of the Conservative Party here. Square that circle, Nadhim. 30 words off you.
Well, I mean, I don't. It's certainly my experience, my constituency. I don't recognise the divide. Communities tend to look at these things. What I try and do is bring the parties together, and then you begin to get somewhere. That was an experience that I sort of used when I was a councillor many decades ago in Wandsworth. Is actually get everyone in the room together, because you hear one story from the developer, the owner, the farmer, who's maybe it's going on their land, and then the energy provider or the local community. But if you can bring people in the room and you begin to look at some of the trade-offs, you get a much more sensible conversation. But I don't recognise this idea that we're being held hostage by a minority of activists that have a different view to the rest of the constituency or the Conservative voters in the constituency. I don't look at how people vote when they walk into a room for a consultation or my surgery. It's just not the way politics is done.
But just forgive me for pressing you, but I mean, your party is committed to cutting or no more support for onshore wind. And I think there are opinion polls. I think probably what Smith was alluding to. There are opinion polls showing that probably the majority of people in the country, if asked, "Do you want more onshore wind?" would say yes. So how is it that you're a politician? You want to do what most people want. That's why you stay in business. Why is your party in that position, do you think?
Well, because also if you ask people with that question, or explain to them with that question that what we have that's already gone through the planning system or in construction is plenty enough to meet the targets that we've set ourselves, which are ambitious targets, then you'll get a very different answer.
Yeah, go ahead. Gentleman back there, hand up.
Thanks very much. My name is Sean Stewart. I chair HACAN, which opposes the third runway at Heathrow. My point really follows on from the question you asked, Chair. I'm not so sure it's a question of giving local people goodies. I think it needs to go beyond that. I think it's trying to engage local people in the debate. And if you engage local people in the debate, then I would suggest that maybe you're reaching not NIMBYism, but a post-NIMBYism. And that's where you should aim for, question mark.
I think
Nigel,
yes.
I got some views on this.
I mean, John and I.
P-NIMBYs,
Yeah.
yes or no?
Well, John and I do lots of meetings with the local community around airports together, and we take different views. I think that what we've found in our discussions with local people is identifying what are their priorities and finding out how we can address them. One example of that is there's a lot of concern amongst in West London with a booming economy and lots of children come to schools from parents about what are their kids going to be doing, and there's a growing number of needs in in Hounslow and in areas of West London. And so one of the things that we've said that we'd do with the third runway is we would eradicate needs in the 5 boroughs surrounding the airport. So basically,
in a good word.
In a good way. We're providing opportunities for every young person. I think that's come out of a discussion with local people. So what John's referring to there is a discussion that goes beyond what is the impact of Heathrow about. What are the issues that are concerning you most in the area where you live? And for many people it is the opportunities that their kids are going to have. So therefore, if you're going to be spending £16 billion of private investment in a huge project in West London, how can you address some of those social issues? And that is, so I think I think John's right. You go beyond what is offering free flights or something that's obviously related to the airport. But how can the airport, how can expansion to Heathrow help address the issues that are keeping people, that are causing people such concerns in their lives, and I think it is addressing people with issues like youth unemployment, which clearly do have a big impact on people's concerns. That if we can do something to address that, then that reaches somewhere. And it's not, I think another thing, and I want to move away from this idea that monetary compensation saves it, because I think for some people there is no price that you can pay. So I think that yes, for some people it is about money, but for many it's not. It is about understanding that it's having a much more complicated discussion. And that's one of some things I was trying to say in my comment, is that I think that the Heathrow, the airport expansion debate, has people can try and simplify it too much. It's a very complicated. People have very complex triggers and whatever. So you have to have a quite detailed, and it is resource intensive, but it's absolutely necessary that if we are going to have the license to grow from people living around the airport, that we understand what the key issues are and that we come up with a plan to address those. So NIMBYism is the way forward.
Unless anyone else wants to talk about NIMBYs, we'll go to the next question. Gentleman there. I've had a bit
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm Simon Dudley. I'm Deputy Leader of the Royal Borough of Windsor and Maidenhead. It's a question here for Nigel. I think I disagree slightly with his polling from what our residents say. But from 2006 and the tape private of BAA, which I worked on, the regulator and the Department for Transport have worked very hard to break up the monopolistic position of BAA. Now, you say only Heathrow can take Britain further, but with Gatwick you have an opportunity to create two national champions which will compete and to give the consumer greater choice. So the question I've got for you is, isn't your basic premise anti-competitive?
No, because I think that while the assertion is they would compete with each other, neither of them would compete with Amsterdam, Paris and Frankfurt. And this isn't about airports in the UK competing with each other. This is about the UK competing with our European competitors. And the global race, the Prime Minister and the Chancellor talk about how competitors in that are not, Surrey, Sussex against West London. It's about the UK against France, Germany and Holland. And to compete effectively against France, Germany and Holland, we need a hub airport that has the capacity and the ability to attract routes from emerging economies in Latin America and in the Far East to this country. And two championship airports won't compete with Premier League airports we have on the continent.
Could I come back with a supplementary there? So why has it been the stated desire and actions of the Department for Transport and the regulator to break up BAA post its acquisition?
I think that the view to, I think that the central premise is that the BAA disagreed with that decision, and I think that that's got nothing to do with the current debate about airport capacity.
I've quietly said yes. Two questions over there, gentleman there, and then the lady in the back corner. Can we? There. But I will ask hopefully these questions can just discuss for the whole panel and not just jumping down on Nigel.
Sit down.
My question might be for you, Chairman. Sorry, Brian Ross, Saffron Walden. The arch NIMBY on this whole debate is probably Boris Johnson, who's made it crystal clear that he's opposed to all the options on the shortlist. So I think the first question for the panel is, has he got enough political muscle to render this whole airport commission process redundant? And for you, Chairman, why does the Daily Telegraph give so many column inches to this arch NIMBY every single week?
I'll give him that one very quickly. He sells newspapers, so that's why we do it. He's a marvellous colleague and a great asset to our industry. So next, Boris, can he kill off Heathrow expansion? Nadhim, start with your
Well, first of all, I wouldn't agree with you that Boris is an arch NIMBY. I think Boris is passionate. He is someone who goes out and makes the arguments on behalf of his plans. That's what you expect from a leader of London to do. He's made those arguments. The Davis Commission clearly disagrees. The last interview I heard him give on this, they're still looking at other options, but that doesn't make him a NIMBY. In that case, Boris is very capable of defending himself, and if you have time, go to his rally today, which is at some point this afternoon. But going back to the issue of runways and what we've heard from Julie, once we have a decision from the Davis report. Let's get on and get it done, would be my point of view. I love Gatwick and Heathrow. I travel through both. I used to travel through both when I was a businessman.
Are you advocating expanding both then?
No, I'm saying that because let's see what the Davis report. I'm not going to preempt the Davis report here, James.
Oh, go on. Nigel, are you scared of Boris?
No, I think that his support for a single hub airport that can refer back to Mark's previous question, the support for a single hub airport that can compete against the best in Europe, the best in the world is clear, and I think that is, you know, the two options that are left for Dave to consider. Only one of them would actually deliver that.
Any strong feelings on the Mayor of London?
Well, I'm actually been involved quite a lot with Boris and his cycle route right now. I've actually been involved as a concrete cutter, and I've actually, with his help of Boris and the Transport of London, I've actually brought on a machine. I've brought through a prototype. I've trademarked it, patented it, and when the cycle route comes through, then it will be at least 2,000 people more employed from that one item. So, you know, he has vision. Okay, he is.
Not always an NIMBY then.
No, he is a character.
Daily Telegraph columnist exonerated. Good. There was a lady in the back corner. I said yes to from the far end a while ago.
Thank you. Joe Churchill. I too work in construction. You started this with infrastructure is vital. Therefore, can't we plan for it? Germany and France carried on building because the minute we have a recession, we turn the tap off on us in construction. And that means we fail to plan, to build, to grow. Now, on the back of that, this week we have announced 100,000 houses. We not only have a skills shortage, we also have a brick shortage. 6 months to a year to get bricks onto site. I am not sure what you are building these 100,000 houses with, but straw and sticks strike me as something. But on the back of that, to make them cheap, you have said you will not take SIL or 106 for infrastructure. Surely, in the light of...
Sorry, can I just clarify? One, can we get to a question?
Yeah, that is the question. Surely that is short-sighted if infrastructure is vital.
When you say you, to whom are you speaking?
I'm sorry, when I say...
When you say you, who you
Sorry, it is to all of them, because to get infrastructure on a more balanced footing for Julie would give her the ability to create those jobs and to move her company forward on a more regulated basis. We need to build houses. We know we've got a housing shortage. So therefore, why don't we make sure the infrastructure is in place prior to building those houses?
Okay, so I'll go from my right to left. So I'm going to say, how do we make sure infrastructure decisions are made and implemented on a long-term basis? They don't fluctuate with the political economic cycle.
Okay, there's two things to say in response to the question. The first is that what you say about actually building the stuff is absolutely right in terms of when we're talking about the recession, and one of the big economic arguments was about whether we should have a fiscal stimulus and what form that stimulus should take. And the approach that was taken was a tax cut, essentially, at the time, where it would have been much better to have invested in infrastructure because it's got longer, better economic benefits than just cutting a tax. The problem was at the time that what became in vogue at the time in terms of the economic debate was this kind of shovel-ready infrastructure projects kind of discussion. And then we actually discovered that a lot of infrastructure projects aren't shovel-ready because we can't get them off the ground the next day because there's so many problems in just actually starting them. What was the second question? Brits.
Who are you?
The second question, is it right to make these houses cheaper by actually not investing in the energy efficiency in them and not having SIL and 106 being put back into the community? You can build houses, but with no roads to them, you're not going to stimulate the house building or the economy.
Okay, I don't know anything about that, to be perfectly honest.
I think that was the Conservative Party's promise in the newspaper on Saturday to try and create a lot of new, possibly more detail than we were going to do. Julie, how do we make these decisions? How do we make decisions and stick to them regardless of
I know.
the economic and
I mean,
political
if you
weather?
think about it, if our infrastructure in this country had matched the leading global economies, our GDP would be up 5% now. Between 2000 and 2010, we'd be well on our way. For me, I think it starts again from the planners. I'm sorry to say, I keep bounding on about them. They are very. They live inside themselves. They don't, as you said, they don't listen to people. They do not. They don't look at what it could do to the greater economy and bring on in the local area. And also, I think we're back to funding. I always come across Vince Cable quite now and then on the radio, and he actually blatantly said to me, as he cannot get the banks to lend any more money to infrastructure, to construction companies, because that's our problem. So the housing industry right now is masking all this infrastructure, because we think we're busy, but we're not. It's housing. And when the infrastructure is not being put into roads, bridges, link roads, it just becomes a bigger problem. So for us, for me as a business owner, it's getting the right funding, the right support, the right training, and get those planners to actually make a decision.
Nadhim, long-term planning. You're a politician. You're thinking. We're always thinking about 50 minutes ahead, or essentially to the next general election, and that's about it. Because if you aren't re-elected, you haven't got a job, so you go. So, but is that not part of the problem here? That politicians are, by definition, short-term creatures, and we're trying to take long-term decisions. How do you resolve that?
Well, first of all, let me ask the room: how many people in the room know that we have got a national infrastructure strategy? Put your hands up. Oh, that's good.
Good crowd.
But clearly half the room, almost half the room, didn't know that we have a national infrastructure strategy. So I apologise to you, because the challenge is not one of having a strategy. We have got one.
But that strategy
Let
lasts as
me-
long as you're in government.
No, it's far longer than that.
Well,
Absolutely. Let me tell you why. Because it goes.
If by some sad chance
Right.
you're out of government next time around, how do you bind
Well,
those?
the new administration would have to decide whether they're going to keep it or not. But what we've done, which hadn't been done before in the UK, certainly hadn't been done in the previous 13 years under Labour, is actually have a strategy, right, which covers transport, energy, digital, and so on. Let me just give you one other fact. We've also attracted someone, and I would say this with Nigel because I know him well and I highly rate him, is a bloke called John Manzoni, who is head of UK infrastructure today. Now, this guy has run more complex infrastructure projects than probably I've had hot dinners. And that's what it needs, because these projects are complex. They are difficult. And he's been attracted from the private sector, where I could tell you what he was earning there was a quantum bigger than what he's getting inside government, to deliver the national infrastructure strategy.
Can I ask? Okay,
sorry, let me just tackle sort of one other thing. I apologise. On your question, very good question about the announcement that was made on Monday about the sill and where would the roads come to those housing. The housing that we're proposing is on brownfield sites. Brownfield sites, by definition, will have roads very, very, very close to them. I was vice chair of planning for 3 years in Wandsworth, and I can tell you, even in a borough as congested as Wandsworth, there's still sites that are brownfield that you can identify. It is a challenge, but it's the right one to deal with. It is absolutely the right thing to do, is to build more housing.
That was the broadcast on behalf of the Conservative Party. The cross-party question I was going to ask you was, you talk about a long-term national infrastructure plan and the question of whether or not it will survive a change of government. The question is, should you not be trying to take a more cross-party approach to these things? So to make sure that workers in government around, they've already signed up all this strategy,
which is why we
instead of having rounds about planning and infrastructure, why don't you put us on the there are some issues that are too big to fight about.
Absolutely. Which is why
say something nice about the local.
I'm about to. Which is why I applaud Chuck Ramuna at their conference, in a very similar setting to this, actually said he is going to try, and maybe difficult for him in his party, but I admire him for trying. He's going to try and take politics out of infrastructure investment.
And then, James, I think that the Airports Commission potentially provides the model for that. So I think that it was set up with cross-party support. It was the terms of reference and membership were, I don't think the opposition had a veto on it, but they were certainly consulted on, and that certainly when it started this process, there was a commitment from all three parties that this process was, and certainly all the parties that have been engaged in the process, now been going on for almost 3 years, have invested the time and resources on the understanding that this is, that whatever recommendation Davis makes to whatever government there is next summer will stick.
We need lots more Howard Davises then.
Yeah, maybe, yeah.
Terrifying thought. Shall I squeeze in one more question from a gentleman who's presented?
Going back to, my name's Nick Tennant from the Thames Tideway Tunnel. Going back to the grassroots issue of NIMBYism, I just wanted to ask the panel, our experience really in many ways was not how do you deal with NIMBYism, but how do you tackle cynicism, because lots of people just thought the decision had been made and it was all a done deal. And also, in terms of enforcement, because I think that's something that we dealt with, is that previous infrastructure projects in local localities, much smaller, promises have been made but weren't seen through. Whose job is that enforcement?
Time is short, so very briefly, how do we persuade people that actually the planners, the official politicians involved are giving us a fair hearing, and then how do we make sure that the developers who implement these projects actually do the things they are going to see, they said they're going to do? Everybody 30 words off you, sorry.
Right. Look, I actually think if you look at all this stuff and you talk to developers, etc., there's actually only so much they can do. There's only so much a developer or somebody who's building infrastructure can go down the road of actually taking people. If people are going to be naturally cynical, then I think you've probably already lost them, and you've got to focus on the people who are available to have their opinion changed and who are a bit more open-minded. The one thing I'd probably say about that and the nature of NIMBYism and cynicism, I do wonder, we were discussing it the other day in the office, whether the advent of social media and everything else had contributed to a different wave of NIMBYism and how that had affected the way that people organise themselves into opposing infrastructure problems, and whether that poses a completely different problem for people trying to get developments off the ground.
You sound like you were quite cynical about planners. So, what persuaded you that actually they were open-minded and had the country's best interest now?
Really, being a bit more proactive inside industries, being inside, looking at ground.
If they came to talk to you more, to try to explain the decision-making process.
Yes, and to actually go out and see some of these shovel-ready sites, because they are there, sitting there, and as you said, there's a lot of roads that are actually very close to them, but they don't even leave their offices, they don't know, they just look at plans, and they can not ever see what's going on around them, so get them out there.
You'd be a local planner on Wanders Council. How do you persuade people that it's a good and noble calling and you have the best interests of people at heart?
Not quite a local planner, the councillor who...
Yes.
No, you raise a very important point. So from the sort of the human perspective of the local community feeling cynical, you effectively see that because, and I have to explain it sometimes and it's really hard to explain, our rule of law, the system that we have designed to organise ourselves as a society, is based on trusting people. Right? That is how it works in the UK. Now, persistent rule breakers will get away with it, and will get away with it for 6 months, a year, 2 years, sometimes longer than that. Eventually, the law catches up with them, and that's a good thing. I think it's a good system. Yes, it can be, frustrating and painful for local communities who are blighted by people who behave badly in the development industry, but it does catch up with them. The other side of it, which people are cynical about, who actually want things done and they see that things don't happen, and I am amazed we haven't discussed it. We clearly have a room full of lawyers who make a lot of money out of judicial reviews, but judicial reviews and lawyers speak, and lawyers sort of lawyers frightening planners, telling them that if they behave this way, or councillors, if they behave this way, they're breaking the rules, they're breaking the law, and they're going to be opening themselves up to challenge and judicial review. And back to what I mentioned in my earlier remarks about, technicalities on consultation can hold you back. That's where the cynicism comes from.
First, kill all lawyers.
Get rid of the lawyers.
Yeah.
I think to counter the cynicism is openness and transparency, and then as what a comment that's been made a couple of times is about effective and early engagement and about talking to people and people really feeling as though they are listening. The Heathrow plans have changed a lot over the last 18 months because of the engagement we're doing. People can see that the plans are changing. People believe that their voice is being listened to.
Thank you very much. I see some of our guests have to be away now, so I think we'll wrap it up there. Thank you all very much.